Wealth, fame, power.
Power is one of the most important yet inconsistent things in One Piece, which is why I'm taking on the daunting task of power scaling all of the series, starting from the very beginning and scaling every major character's progression throughout each arc, based on a combination of raw strength, techniques, feats, and portrayal. What's going on? It's your host Tokyo Tron, and welcome to episode 1 of Power Scaling all of One Piece, starting with the Romance Dawn arc. Now, this arc is relatively small compared to the rest of One Piece, as it only covers around 7 chapters or 3 episodes in the anime. And because Romance Dawn is so small, I'm gonna be going through the whole arc and scaling every major character in the arc, and also putting them into this tier list. Starting from the very beginning, Kid Luffy is a beast for his age. Initially, he might not seem like much, but we have to keep in mind his training with his grandpa Garp. This training involved him fighting tons of different animals in the jungle, and for this reason alone, Luffy is at least marine fodder level by this point in the story. Even though he's just a kid right now, he's still a lot stronger than the average civilian, cause no regular guy in One Piece is gonna be killing animals at the age of 5. Now, things start to get a little complex with Shanks and his crew, so I'll break down the timeline to justify his scaling. The first thing to note is at this point in the story, Shanks has already finished his legendary duels with Mihawk, who is the world's greatest swordsman. But at the same time, Shanks isn't a Yonko yet. Even though Shanks isn't a Yonko yet, it's hard to imagine that there could be such a dramatic creep in power after leaving Fuchsia Village, so I have to assume that he's at least around Yonko level at the time of meeting Luffy, at least in terms of strength. So at this point in the story, I would highball Shanks to being around a low Yonko level, or at minimum, at least YC1+. Next up, we have Lucky Roo, who's one of Shanks' commanders, and we can scale him based on Shanks. But I also want to talk about some of his feats in this arc. His biggest feat in the arc is also his introduction, and this is when he's able to speed blitz and shoot one of the mountain bandits before he could react. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind about this is that the mountain bandits are quite literally the definition of fodder. And yes, a speed blitz is impressive no matter what, but because the mountain bandits are so weak, we can't really use that to scale Lucky Roo super effectively. But based on where I scaled Shanks at this point in the series, and since Lucky Roo is one of his top commanders, I have to highball Lucky Roo to around low YC2, and lowball him to either YC3 or YC4. You might be a bit confused as to why I highballed Lucky Roo to be YC2 at this point in the story, so I'm gonna take a quick break and explain Shanks' crew's current power scaling, and how his crew is different than most other Yonkos. So in a normal Yonko crew, we have the Yonko sitting up top, and then there's a pretty large gap, and then there's a first commander. Then there's a little bit of a smaller gap, then the second commander, then an even smaller gap, and the third commander. But that's just typical of a normal Yonko crew, and not how Shanks' crew is structured. Shanks' crew is canonically stated to be one of the most balanced crews, and Shanks' right hand Ben Beckman has a lot of clout in the One Piece verse. So based on portrayal, if I were to lowball all of Shanks' crew, that means that all of his commanders at the worst are stronger than everyone else's commanders. Meaning that at the worst, a character like Ben Beckman would be a little bit stronger than Katakuri and a little bit stronger than King. But that's just lowballing, and here's how I actually think Shanks' crew is structured. So first, we have Shanks up top as the Yonko, definitively the strongest person in his crew. But the difference between Shanks and his first commander isn't as much as it is in other crews. So we have Ben Beckman a little below Shanks, so either the very bottom of Yonko level or somewhere in YC1+. Then we have Lucky Roo and Yasopp. I'm not really sure which one of them is stronger, but assuming that Lucky Roo is stronger, he would be YC1 level, and Yasopp would be YC2+, or at the worst, the very top of YC2. So Shanks' crew is very compressed in that way, unlike most of the other Yonko crews. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's head back over to Romance Dawn. So up next we got Ben Beckman. and I'm gonna scale him just like I did Lucky Roo, just in relation to Shanks. Since Ben Beckman is especially relative to Shanks, as I just discussed, at this point in the story, Shanks is low Yonko level or YC1+. So I'll put Ben Beckman at around YC1+ or YC1. Just like Lucky Roo, Ben Beckman also had a very good showing in this arc, defeating all of the mountain bandits by himself by hitting them with his gun. And just like Lucky Roo, even though this is very impressive to be able to pretty much 1v20, at the end of the day, the mountain bandits are the epitome of fodder. So relative to the rest of the One Piece verse, this feat by Ben Beckman doesn't really matter. And quickly, Higuma and all of the rest of the mountain bandits, they're all pretty much equally trash. I'm gonna put them all in fodder tier, with Higuma being on top of all of them as the so-called king of fodder. And with all of that out of the way, the prologue to the story has been completely scaled, and now we can move on to the real beginning of One Piece, and move on to what I'll call Barrel Luffy for rather obvious reasons. So this is Luffy at the very beginning of his journey, and at this point he has a rather basic understanding and mastery of his devil fruit. He hasn't developed any of his gears yet, and his techniques are all basically just basic attacks with more range since he can stretch. I would put this Luffy at mid tier on the tier list. And the next character is Alvida, who got one shot by Luffy, and in general just had a very bad showing. And even though Alvida had a really bad showing against Luffy, at the end of the day it is Luffy, so I'm not gonna put her in fodder tier, I'll put her right above it in low tier. Next up is Kobe, and there's really not much to say about Kobe at this point in the story. He's just a regular kid, and at this point he's at the very bottom in civilian level. He has no feats, and his portrayal in this arc is really bad, so I can't really scale him any higher than this. And finally things start to get a little more interesting with the introduction of Zoro in this first little mini arc. So first off, we have Helmeppo, and he's a civilian just like Kobe at this point in the story. So at this point, I'm putting him in civilian tier, putting him actually right behind Kobe. His portrayal is a lot worse than Kobe's, even though Kobe's portrayal is also bad. But if we look into future arcs, just how Kobe's physicals are in comparison to Helmeppo, it's really not even that close, so Kobe's gonna be on top of him at least for now. Now we have Axe Hand Morgan. Morgan's kind of hard to scale based on his showing in the arc, but I want to wank him a bit and just point out that he can easily one-shot any of the basic marines. But also keep in mind I put all of the basic marines in fodder tier, and at the end of the day he was easily defeated as he gets blitzed and one-shot by Zoro. So I have to put him in low tier right above fodder. Even though he's in low tier, he's gonna be at the top of low tier, and there's definitely arguments made that he could be put in low mid tier, but because of how easily he was blitzed and one shot by Zoro, I have to keep him here. And now finally Zoro. At this point in the story, Luffy and Zoro are portrayed as being relatively equal. They're both shown taking out a group of marines relatively easily, and Zoro actually gets the final hit in this arc on Axe Hand Morgan. Also, considering Zoro has been starved for the past 29 days or so, he's nowhere near max strength and he's still keeping up with Luffy. So I would argue that Zoro and Luffy are both at mid tier, but at least for now, Zoro is above Luffy in mid tier, at least by a little bit. And after scaling Zoro, that's it for all of the major fighters introduced in Romance Dawn. Here's a quick refresher of the tier list as of now at the end of this arc. So we have Helmeppo and Kobe at civilian. We have Higuma and the mountain bandits at fodder. Then we have Alvida and Axe Hand Morgan both in low tier. Then in mid tier we have Zoro and Luffy. Then we have Lucky Roo at YC2. Ben Beckman coming in at YC1+. And Shanks coming in, he's gonna be at the very bottom of Yonko level. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, come back next Friday for when I power scale all of Orange Town. And to stay up to date with all of my videos, make sure to like and subscribe.